If she plays the piano, I quit right now." Director Richard Thompson's laughter echoed through the auditorium of the prestigious Manhattan Academy of Classical Music, followed by muffled giggles from the judges and students in attendance. His blue eyes sparkled with cruel amusement as he watched the 17-year-old girl standing in the center of the stage. Amara Johnson held the sheet music she had brought with her firmly, completely ignoring the fact that all the other candidates were using expensive tablets with her music digitized. The awkward silence that followed the director's comment was broken only by the sound of a few cell phones being discreetly turned on to record what everyone expected to be an epic disaster. "Excuse me, sir?" Amara asked with a calmness that surprised even herself. Her voice didn't waver at all, even though her heart was pounding like a runaway drum. Thompson leaned forward in his chair, that condescending smile still plastered on his face. "Darling, this is the most exclusive classical music academy in the country. Our students start at age 4. With the best private teachers in the world. Do you really think you can compete with that?" Professor Mitchell, sitting next to him, muttered something about giving her a chance. But Thompson cut her off with an impatient gesture. "No, let her try. It will be educational for all of us." He turned to the other judges. "Want to bet how long it'll take her to give up?" "I say less than 2 minutes." Amara had grown up in the Bronx, where the sound of piano came from churches on Sundays and jazz bars on Friday nights. She had never set foot in an academy like this one, with its marble floors and portraits of dead composers watching over everything from above. But she had also never been intimidated by people who judged her worth by the color of her skin or the zip code she came from. "What piece have you prepared?" Thompson asked, clearly amused by the situation. "Something simple, I imagine. Perhaps Mary Had a Little Lamb." Laughter spread through the audience like wildfire. Some girls whispered among themselves, discreetly pointing at Amara and making comments that she pretended not to hear. "Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor." The answer came out like a shot, cutting through the mocking air in the auditorium. Thompson's smile faltered for a split second before returning even wider. "Rachmaninoff, are you sure you know how to pronounce that correctly?" "More laughter, honey. That concerto is played by pianists who have studied for decades to master it. Even his most advanced students find it challenging." Amara walked over to the Steinway piano that occupied center stage, an instrument that cost more than the house she lived in with her grandmother. Her hands, accustomed to the worn keys of the church piano where she practiced every day after school, trembled slightly as she touched that perfect surface. "You know what?" Thompson stood up dramatically. "I'm going to make a public bet. If this little girl can play Rachmaninoff, and when I say play, I mean really play, not just randomly hit keys, I will resign from my position as director of this academy." The auditorium fell completely silent. Even the whispers stopped. Cell phones were raised in every corner, ready to capture the moment when the girl from the Bronx would be publicly humiliated, or impossibly, the moment when one of the most arrogant directors in the world of classical music would be forced to fulfill a stupid promise. Amara sat down on the piano bench and adjusted the height. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her grandmother's words. "Daughter, when the world underestimates you, let your music speak for you." What no one in that auditorium knew was that Amara Johnson wasn't just a girl from the Bronx with an impossible dream. She was something much more dangerous to people like Thompson. A musical prodigy who had been forged in adversity and was about to prove that talent has no color, social class, or zip code, as she positioned her fingers on the keys. A small smile touched the corners of her mouth. If this story of determination against all odds is stirring something in his mind, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what is about to happen on this stage will completely redefine the meaning of the word impossible. What Thompson didn't know and couldn't have imagined was that Amara Johnson had grown up with the sound of prejudice echoing in his ears since she was 5 years old. When other academy directors said that maybe jazz would be more appropriate for someone like her, when private teachers canceled lessons after meeting her in person, when instrument stores followed her around as if she were going to steal something, every no had been fuel. Every closed door a lesson about the world she would have to conquer. "Professor Mitchell," Thompson turned to the judge beside him without even trying to lower his voice. "I will use this situation as an example for our students about the importance of proper preparation. It will be a valuable lesson about reality versus fantasy." Mitchell looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The silence was complicit, and Amara knew that kind of complicity well. It was the same silence that allowed white boys from Manhattan to be accepted with mediocre performances, while she would need to be perfect just to be considered. Thompson continued his presentation to the audience, as if Amara were merely an object of study. "Look, this is an educational opportunity. How many of you think she'll make it through more than 2 pages before giving up?" Hands shot up across the auditorium. Muffled laughter spread. Cell phones continued to record. now with the expectation of guaranteed virality. It wasn't every day you saw her attempt as brave as this one, but while Thompson orchestrated his cruel comedy, Amara was mentally revisiting the last 12 years of her life. Waking up at 5 a.m. to practice at church before school, working as a babysitter in the afternoons to pay for bus tickets to Manhattan, where the free weekend classes were held, studying sheet music in public libraries because she couldn't afford to buy it. Her grandmother, Donna Mae, had been his only constant. A former jazz pianist who never had the opportunity his talent deserved. She recognized her granddaughter's gift, the first chord Amara played at age 6. "Honey," she said that day, "you have hands that were made to tell stories. But in this world, you're going to have to shout those stories for anyone to hear. What are you waiting for?" Thompson consulted his watch with theatrical impatience. "Oh, maybe you need time to, how do you say, get ready." The reference was not subtle. It was the kind of comment he made when he thought he was being clever. Reducing a person's entire identity to cheap stereotypes that fed his inflated ego, Amara placed her fingers on the keys. The Steinway responded differently from the church piano. More sensitive, more dynamic, more alive. It was like trading a bicycle for a Ferrari. Each key promised possibilities that she had only dreamed of. "One last thing," Thompson announced, clearly enjoying his own performance. "When, not if you fail. I want everyone to see how real talent differs from, how can I put it, misdirected ambition." It was at that moment that something lit up in Amara's eyes. It wasn't anger. Anger would be emotional, reactive, exactly what Thompson expected. It was something much more dangerous. Crystal clear determination mixed with years of quiet preparation. Because Thompson had made the classic mistake of men like him. He assumed that knowing the system meant knowing talent, that privilege equaled competence, that her position gave her the authority to judge the potential of people he didn't even bother to get to know. What he didn't know was that Amara hadn't gotten there by accident. She hadn't woken up one morning and decided to try the most prestigious academy in the country. Every note she would play in the next few pages had been studied, dissected, practiced until it became part of her muscle memory. Rachmaninoff was not a random choice. It was a declaration of war. While the audience waited for the inevitable failure, while Thompson mentally prepared the condescending words he would use to console him after the public humiliation, while cell phones continued to record what everyone expected to be yet another confirmation that certain people should know his place, Amara closed her eyes for one last second. And in that second, she heard her grandmother's voice. "When the world tries to make you small, you respond by becoming bigger than he ever imagined possible." The first note rang out through the auditorium like a gunshot. It wasn't the hesitant, nervous note everyone expected. It was a note that carried 12 years of preparation, centuries of classical music, and the unwavering determination of a girl, his little girl, who had turned every note into fuel for this very moment. Thompson felt something strange in his stomach. It was just one note, he told himself. One note meant nothing, but deep down, a primitive part of his brain, the part that recognized true talent when it heard it, began to whisper a word he refused to accept: impossible. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside her that his oppressors couldn't see. A silent force fueled by the very injustice he tried to impose, for a moment. When she closed her eyes in the face of all those cruel expectations, Thompson thought he had broken her spirit. But those who know true greatness know that it grows precisely in the silence before the storm. Rachmaninoff's opening phrases flowed across the keys like water running over polished stones. Each note carried a precision that made the entire auditorium hold its breath. It wasn't just technique, it was pure interpretation, as if Amara were conversing directly with the composer across time. Thompson felt the smile slowly fade from his face. The girl wasn't just playing the right notes. She was playing with a musical maturity that he rarely saw in pianists with decades of experience. His brain refused to process what his ears were picking up. "Impossible," he muttered to Mitchell, who had leaned forward in her chair, completely absorbed in the performance. She must have memorized some recording. "It's just imitation," but even as he spoke, Thompson knew he was lying to himself. Imitation did not produce that quality of sound, that emotional connection to each musical phrase. What he was hearing was genuine artistry. Mitchell didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on Amara, who was now navigating through technical passages that made advanced students give up in tears. The girl's hands moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of physics. In the audience, the cell phones that had been raised to record a failure were now capturing something completely different. Students who had come to witness a public humiliation found themselves witnessing something that would change her own perspectives on classical music forever. Jennifer Walsh, daughter of a famous conductor and pianist since the age of 4, whispered to her friend beside her, I've been trying to learn this passage for 2 years, and I've never been able to play it like that. How is she doing it? What no one in that auditorium knew was that Amara Johnson had been preparing for this moment since she was 8 years old. When her grandmother Donna Mae took her to her first free lesson at the Bronx Community Center, she immediately realized that her granddaughter possessed something rare. Not just talent, but an instinctive understanding of music that couldn't be taught. "Honey," Donna Mae had said on that first day, "you have the gift, but in this world, gift isn't enough. You're going to have to be 10 times better than any white kid to get half the recognition." From that day on, Amara had lived a double life during the day. She attended the dilapidated public school where the teachers could barely pronounce his name correctly. But every afternoon, after her homework, she would walk to Mount Olive Baptist Church, where Reverend James allowed her to practice on the out-of-tune piano in the basement. 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 9 years. While other children watched TV or played video games, Amara dissected sheet music in public libraries, studying recordings of Horowitz, Rubinstein, and Ashkenazi on borrowed computers. She transcribed jazz solos that her grandmother whistled, connecting her family's musical heritage with the classical world she dreamed of conquering. The real preparation had begun 2 years earlier when Donna Mae, using her life savings, managed to pay for 3 private lessons with Professor David Chun, a retired concert pianist who had played with the world's finest orchestras. She has superior natural technique to students who have studied 10 years at conservatories, Chun had reported to Donna Mae after the first lesson. But more than that, she understands music as an emotional language. That's something you can't teach. Chun had become Amara's secret mentor, meeting with her on weekends in borrowed practice rooms, polishing not only her technique, but also preparing her psychologically for the world that would try to reject her. "When you sit on that stage," Chun had instructed during one of their last lessons, "there will be people who decide you don't belong there before you even play a note. Your music must be so perfect, so unquestionable, that it will silence even the most ingrained prejudices." Now, as her hands danced through the concerto's complex development, Amara could hear Professor Chun's words echoing in her mind. Every chord she played was a statement, every phrase a response to the condescending whispers she had heard upon entering that auditorium. Thompson had begun to sweat. The performance wasn't just going well. It was extraordinary. He glanced at the other judges, looking for some sign that they shared his discomfort, but found only genuine fascination. "Maybe we should stop," Thompson suggested weakly. "We've heard enough to make an assessment. Are you crazy?" Mitchell replied without taking her eyes off Amara. "This is Rachmaninoff played at concert level. Let her finish." The music built toward an emotional climax that demanded not only technical dexterity, but an artistic maturity that Thompson had insisted was impossible for someone of Amara's age and background. Every note proved how catastrophically wrong he had been. Students in the audience had stopped whispering. Some were clearly moved, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare and powerful. Others filmed with a reverence that contrasted sharply with the expectation of mockery they had brought to the auditorium. Amara reached the most technically challenging passage of the movement, a section that required coordination between the hands that few pianists had completely mastered. Her fingers flew over the keys with a precision that seemed to defy human anatomy. It was at this moment that Thompson realized the true extent of his mistake. This was not a teenager with unrealistic dreams. She was a trained artist who had meticulously prepared for this moment. And he, in his arrogance, had bet his career against someone who clearly belonged at the highest levels of classical music. Panic began to set in. His public promise had not only been cruel, it had been stupid. Dozens of cell phones were recording. Students who respected his authority were witnessing his impending humiliation. And the performance that was supposed to prove his superiority was demonstrating exactly the opposite. In the back row of the auditorium, a discreet figure watched with a smile of satisfaction. Professor Chun had arrived 15 minutes early using the back entrance. He knew this moment would come, and he wanted to be there when his student turned prejudice into triumph. As Amara navigated passages that made professional pianists tremble with nervousness, an undeniable truth echoed through the auditorium. Talent knew no color, social class, or zip code, and anyone who thought otherwise was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The music approached its final climax, each chord building inexorably toward a moment that would redefine not only Amara's life, but the very foundations upon which that institution had been built. Rachmaninoff's final movement exploded through the walls of the auditorium like a perfectly controlled emotional storm. Amara's hands danced across the keys with a mastery that made professional pianists look like amateurs. Each chord was a hammer breaking cruel expectations. Each melodic phrase a declaration of war against institutionalized prejudice. Thompson had completely stopped pretending to be indifferent. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he watched his 25-year career crumble in real time. Cell phones in the audience captured not only Amara's extraordinary performance, but also every expression of growing panic on the director's face. "My God," Mitchell whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. "She's playing better than Horowitz on the 1978 recording." The most technically impossible passage arrived. The section that separated amateurs from virtuosos. Her fingers flew through scales at supersonic speed while maintaining perfect dynamic control. It was humanly impossible, but it was happening before dozens of witnesses, in the audience. Students who had come to mock were now filming with religious reverence. Jennifer Walsh, who had always considered herself the best pianist of her generation, was crying openly. "I could never play like that," she admitted to her friend beside her. "Not in a million years." Thompson tried to stand up to interrupt the performance, but his legs failed him. The reality of what he had publicly promised was materializing like a nightmare. It wasn't just his position that was at stake. It was his entire reputation, built on decades of arrogance and elitism. "Richard," the chairman of the board whispered in his ear, "did you really say you would resign if she played well?" I was joking," Thompson stammered. But even he knew there was no turning back. Dozens of cell phones had captured his cruel promise. In a matter of hours, it would be viral across all platforms. Amara reached the final climax, a passage that required superhuman coordination between her hands, extraordinary physical strength, and absolute emotional control. She played with an intensity that made the auditorium itself seem too small to contain such greatness. The final chord exploded like thunder, reverberating through every corner of the space. Then, absolute silence. Amara rose from her seat with the same dignity she had maintained throughout the humiliation. There was no arrogance in her posture, only the serenity of someone who had proven a point that transcended music. Talent knew no color, social class, or zip code. The audience erupted in applause that lasted a full 5 minutes. Students stood up, teachers cried openly. Even cleaning staff who had stopped to listen applauded from the doorway. "Bravo!" Someone shouted, "Bravissimo!" Thompson remained seated, paralyzed by the magnitude of his mistake. It wasn't just that he had underestimated Amara. He had publicly humiliated a world-class artist, and it had all been recorded. "Mr. Thompson," she addressed him with a calmness that contrasted with the emotional chaos around her, "I believe you have something to fulfill." The phrase cut through the air like a blade. All eyes turned to Thompson, who realized there was no escape. His promise had been specific, public, and impossible to deny. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately," he muttered, but his voice was drowned out by the collective whisper of disapproval. "With all due respect, sir," Amara replied, "your promise was public. Your answer should be too." Professor Chun, who had been watching discreetly from the back, approached the stage. "Richard, you have not only underestimated an extraordinary artist, you have demonstrated exactly the kind of prejudice that this institution should combat." "Not perpetuate," the audience murmured in agreement. Students who had always respected Thompson's authority now saw him for what he truly was, a small man hiding behind empty titles and traditions. Mitchell rose from the judges' table. "Amara, on behalf of this academy, I deeply apologize for the treatment you received. Your performance was transcendent." "Thank you," Amara replied simply. "But this isn't about apologies. It's about change." Thompson finally found the strength to stand. Shaking visibly, he knew that every second of hesitation was being recorded, that his reputation was being destroyed in real time on social media. I will keep my word," he said, each word coming out like broken glass. "I will submit my resignation to the board tomorrow morning." The statement was met not with celebration, but with heavy silence. Justice had been served, but everyone understood that it was a bitter victory, necessary but revealing of much deeper problems. A student in the audience shouted, "This is live on Instagram. It already has 50,000 views." Thompson felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. It wasn't just his position that was lost. His reputation throughout the classical music world was being publicly destroyed. Academics, critics, professional musicians, everyone would see how he had humiliated an extraordinary artist simply out of prejudice. "Amara," Professor Chun approached her, "you have just delivered one of the most impressive performances I have ever witnessed. It would be an honor to help guide your next career steps." As offers of mentorship and opportunities began to pour in from all sides, one inescapable truth hung in the air. The performance had not only changed Amara's life, it had exposed the rotten foundations upon which many prestigious institutions were built. Thompson left the auditorium through the back door, knowing that his career had ended not because of a lack of musical knowledge, but because of a lack of basic humanity in the modern world, where every moment can be recorded and shared instantly. Arrogance came at a very high price. Justice had been served. But the story was just beginning, because when true talent meets opportunity, there is no force in the world that can stop it. 6 months later, Amara's life had been completely transformed. Sitting in her new manager's office in Manhattan, she reviewed contracts for 3 different recordings and invitations to play with international orchestras. The video of your performance had surpassed 15 million views, turning you into a worldwide classical music sensation, Carnegie Hall has confirmed, said David Chun, now officially her mentor, holding the phone. They want you as their principal soloist for the spring season. It's every pianist's dream. Meanwhile, Richard Thompson was living a nightmare that seemed to have no end. The dismissal had only been the beginning. No academy or conservatory in the country would hire him after the viral video. His cruel arrogance had become a case study on institutional bias, discussed at universities and educational conferences. Dad lost another job, his daughter had posted on Instagram, venting about how the family had become social outcasts. No one wants to hire a teacher who publicly humiliates students. The Manhattan Academy had undergone a complete revolution. The new director, Professor Williams, implemented diversity policies and scholarship programs for students from underserved communities. Talent exists everywhere, he stated in an interview. Our responsibility is to find it, not reject it. Mitchell, now the academic director, had become a fierce advocate for inclusion. Amara showed us that excellence has no color or zip code. We almost lost one of the greatest artists of our generation because of pure prejudice. In the Bronx, Mount Olive Church had received enough donations to purchase a new Steinway piano. A gold plaque on the side read, "Donated by Amara Johnson," so that other dreams may find their voices. Donna Mae watched her granddaughter rehearse on that same piano where it all began. "You didn't just fulfill your dream," she said with pride. "You changed the whole game for those who come after." The impact went beyond music. Universities began to review their admissions processes. Companies implemented anti-bias training. And Amara's story became an award-winning documentary about talent versus privilege. "I got 200 messages today," Amara told her grandmother, showing her cell phone. Young black people from all over the country saying they were inspired not to give up on their dreams. Thompson, meanwhile, had sold his Manhattan home and moved into a modest apartment. His wife, tired of the constant social humiliation, had left him. Former colleagues avoided him, and his decades-long reputation had evaporated in 23 minutes of filmed arrogance. "Maybe I should have listened to the music before judging the musician," he admitted to a therapist, finally confronting the prejudice that had destroyed his career. Amara's last performance at Carnegie Hall sold out in 12 minutes. In the audience were conservatory students, music critics, and hundreds of young black people whom she had inspired to pursue their dreams in classical music. As the last chords of Rachmaninoff echoed through the historic theater, the ovation lasted 10 minutes. Tears streamed down the face of Amara as she took her bows, remembering the girl from the Bronx who just wanted to play the piano. "Thank you," she said into the microphone, "for teaching me that the best response to prejudice is not anger. It is excellence." Backstage, offers from record labels and universities were piling up. Amara had become not only a world-renowned pianist, but a symbol that talent transcends all the barriers society tries to impose. Richard Thompson watched the performance on TV from his empty apartment, belatedly recognizing the greatness he had tried to destroy. His arrogance had not only cost his career, it had deprived the world of recognizing a musical genius out of pure prejudice. Amara's revenge was perfect precisely because it wasn't revenge. It was success. It was excellence. It was definitive proof that when people try to diminish you for who you are, the answer is not to become smaller. It is to grow so large that they can no longer ignore your greatness. Thompson tried to destroy Amara, but ended up destroying only himself. Amara learned that true justice is not to repay the prejudice she suffered. It is to achieve a greatness that her oppressors could never imagine. If this story of determination against all odds touched your heart, subscribe to the channel